was the summer of 2014, and for my son's bar mitzvah present, just like many Jewish parents, we wanted him to bond with the Holy Land. Oh, it worked perhaps too well. My husband had stayed back at the hotel, and our friends, my son and I, had just stopped in a pharmacy.
Run to the bomb shelter, sweetie. Please hurry. I didn't hear the sirens at first, but the Israelis did. They're used to hearing these things. We ran to the back of the storeroom. It was a 12-foot by 24-foot windowless bomb shelter. My heart's pounding. Boom! Boom! I hear it and feel the percussion of the exploding bombs. I'm trying not to get sick. I look at my 13-year-old son and I think I'll never forgive myself if something happens to him.
That's an excerpt from a speech I gave to the Orange County Jewish Bar Association. It was the first, but not the last time we had to run to a bomb shelter. Our adventure and my transformation is also the subject of my book, Blasted from Complacency, A Journey from Terror to Transformation in Israel. There is no chapter in a parenting book on what to do when a war starts and you're on a family vacation. Think touring extraordinary and sacred sites mixed with cowering in bomb shelters. I'm still trying to get over the Jewish guilt of taking my son to war for his bar mitzvah present. The impact of being human targets helped me understand the plight of Israelis living like this, and it also made me want to work on peace. How Israel is often described on the news is not what I'd seen with my own eyes. And I felt Palestinian parents also preferred their children playing safely in their backyards. The missiles exploded just near enough to blow apart my world as I knew it, forever changing me. And you'd never recognize my life today with what it was like then. I believe I found my life's purpose. Hello, I'm Penny St, and I'm the host of Peace with Penny. Welcome. It's great to begin another episode in season 2 of Peace with Penny, especially with such an accomplished peacemaker, Pastor John Moyle. John has served as pastor of missions and social justice at the Oakbrook Church in Reston, Virginia since March 2012. In this capacity, he oversees the many community, national, and international outreaches of the church. He has personally led 15 different short-term mission teams sent out from the church, including 11 trips into the northern highlands of Guatemala. He has ministered in Guatemala, Nicaragua, Ecuador, the Dominican Republic, Togo, and the West Bank of Israel-Palestine. For some of his work, an added benefit is that he is fluent in Spanish. In addition, he has ministered locally with troubled youth in the Loudoun County Juvenile Detention Center and with the local Hispanic Day laborer community in a ministry called Lunch for the Soul. Since 2011, he has been involved in peacemaking and reconciliation ministries on the ground in Israel-Palestine and was instrumental in arranging the meetings that eventually led to the founding of Roots-Shorashim-Judur. During the first 3 years of Roots, John's guidance and support were crucial. John has been a member of the pastoral staff since 2003 and has served as senior pastor and youth pastor. He's been married and has had the support of Jenna for 23 years and has 3 children, even spends his time as the offensive line coach for the Herndon High School varsity football team. And with that, hello, John.
Hi, Penny. It's good to be here.
Well, that's an incredibly full life. You've done amazing work in so many areas. Today, we're going to concentrate on your work in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, particularly with your work leading up to and after the founding of Roots-Shorashim-Judur, the first peace organization that I met after our fateful trip in 2014. In 2015, I met Rabbi Hanan, who you'll see in this clip I'm going to show, and Ali Abu Awad, who were also co-founders of Roots when they were on a fundraising tour in the U.S. Rabbi Hanan is a very religious Jewish settler living in the West Bank, although he'd call the area by the ancient religious Jewish name Judea and Samaria. And Ali is a Palestinian who also lives in the West Bank. After our trip to Israel, seeing incredible sights and also running to bomb shelters, I had decided I wanted to work on peace, and I was in the beginnings of writing my book when I met them. They ultimately became part of my life and my book, Blasted from Complacency, A Journey from Terror to Transformation in Israel. Later, I learned that Pastor John had been instrumental in establishing Roots, and I've written about his association with them in the past, and it's an honor to get to interview John on Peace with Penny. But first, I want to let our listeners hear from Rabbi Hanan in a clip that is about 9 minutes, which probably is doubly long what I should play, but forgive me, I can't help myself. I believe it is so powerful in so many ways. I'm sure it'll be worth your time. Hanan at one point not only refers to Pastor John, who is the Christian pastor in the film from Virginia, who actually changed Hanan's life, but you see that Rabbi Hanan is an amazing human being, and he teaches such an important lesson of awareness and being conscious of your thoughts that goes beyond peacemaking, but into the necessity of the impact of our thoughts and being honest with ourselves, which can lead to amazing transformations. Being totally truthful with you, it brings tears to my eyes every time I watch it as Rav Hanan lays bare his beautiful soul.
The question was, what is pain? So I have to limit that question to a certain very specific pain. And that's the type of pain that I experienced and experience, and I think that many, many, many peace builders experience at the outset, at the beginning, and perhaps even in the continuation of the journey. And that's the pain of leaving behind the sense that my story is the only story. One day about 5.5 years ago, which means we're talking about the middle of 2013 probably, I was driving in my car here in the area in which I live, of the West Bank, Judah and Samaria, Gush Etzion, whatever you want to call it, occupied territory, liberated territory, greater Israel-Palestine. Driving my car with two Protestant pastors from the US. And they were my friends, they were my guests. They wanted me to show them the flourishing of Jewish settlement here after 2,000 years of exile. They wanted to see how the prophecies of the Bible are coming true. The Jewish people, the sons and daughters of the land, are coming back and making it bloom. So we're driving around, I'm showing them forests and settlements and what we built here. Picked up a hitchhiker as we're driving, picked up another one. When the second hitchhiker got out of the car, one of the pastors, his name was Bob Roberts from Texas, Bob turns to me in this big Texas grin, jolly laugh. Hanan, you're such a great guy. You picked up hitchhikers. Wow, what an example. Back in Texas where I come from, he said, no one does that. So I said to him, Bob, look, it's not just me. Around here, we all pick up hitchhikers. We have a common vision. We trust each other just like everyone else. I do my very best to pick up every person who puts out his finger for a ride. And somehow at that moment, I realized that I was lying. I was lying to Bob, but even worse, I was lying to myself. And what bothered me at that moment was not the fact that I don't pick up Palestinians. What bothered me was the fact that I hadn't realized until that moment that I don't pick up Palestinians. And I suddenly saw that there's something that I don't see. That was like a moment of revelation. Because I remember I said to Bob in the car, Bob, wow, there's something wrong with me. And I realized that I was completely blind. I was embarrassed. I felt that humiliated myself. That I said I pick up every person, which means either that I didn't see the Palestinians or I didn't see them as people. And that's against everything I believe, that I'm dehumanizing. So I felt called to change that. So, okay, so how do you begin to see people that you don't see? That's like, how do you do that? Over Facebook, I got word of a Protestant pastor in Reston, Virginia, the other side of the ocean. He said he has this Christian ministry. He comes to the Holy Land twice a year, meets Israelis, meets Palestinians, and he introduces them to each other. And he gave me instructions, wrote them out, where and when to go to meet Palestinians. And I get to this piece of Palestinian farmland. I've never been on a piece of Palestinian land in my life. I walk in the gate, and I see inside something that can't be. I see a miracle. I see 15 Israelis and 15 Palestinians, and they are talking to each other. Jamal, we shake hands, we talk. Jamal first said that he lives in Beit Umar, a Palestinian village about 6 minutes from my house by car. He said, Hanan, I know you know this, just want to make sure that the kids in Beit Umar, 5 years old, 10 years old, when they see someone who looks like you, Jamal said, they start to cry. I had no idea what he was talking about. I said, Jamal, why? And he did not understand why I did not understand. As if everyone looks at Hanan, starts to cry. Why? So finally, out of frustration, he says, Hanan, it's the kippah on your head. And it's the beard. And it's the tzitzit hanging from your pants. Because all the people look like you. They carry submachine guns. And he does like this. And they kill the kids in Beit Umar. And I see an image of my neighbors walking in the fields. Well, my neighbors carry guns. So I said, that's why they're afraid of the guns. So I finally said to Jamal, well, Jamal, what do you want? We carry guns because we're afraid of you. And he was so offended. He said, what are you talking about? You're not afraid of us. We're afraid of you. There is a line in the Passover celebration that we Jews celebrate every year. And in English translation, it says, in every generation, they come to annihilate us. And here in Israel, that line has been set to music in 4 or 5 different versions. It's on the radio before the Passover holiday for the month before. Everyone's singing it. The kids learn it in kindergarten. Everyone's singing, the nations of the world are coming to annihilate us, but we survive. And I began to realize, as a result of my connection to Palestinians, that we are perpetuating a sense of victimhood that creates reality in which we always see that they're coming to destroy us. By living in that narrative of victimhood, we're ensuring that we'll never go beyond that reality. We'll always see enemies, because I think most people think that for identity to be meaningful, it has to be exclusive. That I'm right and you're wrong. I exist and you don't exist. My story is true and your story is false. And to say that my story is true, but his story is also true, to many Israelis and Palestinians, it sounds like you're saying my story is false and only his story is true. There's a concept in Jewish thought that's called abundant peace. Not just peace, but abundant peace. In Hebrew, Rav Shalom. Abundant peace means being able to hold together all of the conflicting truths. It means that you're creating a larger whole. By the way, the word whole and the word peace in Hebrew are the same word. A whole that's just like light, in which white light is made up of many, many different refracted colors. And you get the whole only from the bring together and the acceptance of all the different hues, all the different parts. So peace building, peacemaking, is about collecting the sparks of conflicting truths, bringing them all together, and creating a situation in which each of them sees the light in the other. That's some vision there. Wow. When are we going to get to that?
Great video.
Yeah, yeah. Really gets to me every time. He's so impactful, I believe. Um, I have so many reactions to that clip, but one thing Rav Hanan spoke of was the fear on both sides and the surprise on both sides that the other fears them. Fear is pervasive in Israel-Palestine, and I personally believe everyone over there suffers at least somewhat from PTSD. Can you talk about the damage that fear does throughout both peoples and its impact on the ability to bring peace?
Fear is something that doesn't just sort of crop up on its own. A series of events, trauma, abuse, it can be any variety of different things can lead to fear, growing up in a person or among a people group. I think so much of it has to do with the traumas that both Israelis and Palestinians have suffered through in the past. Certainly, the Jews and what they faced, certainly in the 20th century with the Holocaust, and then finally, moving into their homeland, and then, facing yet another adversary. You have this sort of collective, maybe trauma that has grown up. And Rav Hanan mentioned it. This sense that the nations of the world, those who are outside of your group are out to annihilate you. You end up building up this fear of the other. I think another thing that leads to fear growing up between peoples is a lack of truly knowing the other. When the other is someone who's separated from you, who you don't have relationship with, your lives do not connect in the course of your average day, you tend to start viewing that other, the one who's different from you, with suspicion. Misunderstanding comes into play, mistrust, even stereotypes begin to build up, and this leads to fear. And fear, as you mentioned, has gripped so many on both the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side. The Palestinian trauma of 1948 and so many losing their homes and being driven out of their homes, that's kind of the abuse, the trauma the Palestinians have carried. This all leads to the fear of the other. And when you live in fear of the other, it's just a small step to where violence begins, where you start to feel either justified in your fear or in using physical violence against the other. And we see it come into play certainly in Israel-Palestine, but I even see it here in the United States. Even the great political divides in the United States, in divides between citizens and undocumented immigrants in the country, that this lack of true relationship and knowledge of the other leads to, at some level, a fear of the other. And it's what leads to all the different conflicts that we see in America, across the world.
Yeah. One of the main topics we're going to talk about today is an incredible organization that you were instrumental in helping found called Roots-Shorashim-Judur. And could you talk a little bit about who they are and what their mission is?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, in a way, I don't like to say I co-founded it, because I really believe that the Israelis and the Palestinians who staff that organization and who work the programs and do the hard work on the ground, I really believe that they're the co-founders. I
Well,
think I was,
certainly you were an important spark.
yeah, I think, I was blessed to be able to play a role in bringing some of these folks together for the first time. And, I feel blessed that I had the opportunity to know people on both sides, Israelis and Palestinians, who had this desire to cross the divide. And we talked about the divide of, mistrust and misunderstanding and suspicion and eventually fear, uh, that I had built up relationships over time with people on both sides, that being able to bring them together was one of the great really privileges that I've had and that I've been blessed with in my life. Roots Roots really has filled a void where that was a void that's really existed in the West Bank and Judea and Samaria, since 1967, a safe place where Israelis and Palestinians can come together and build relationships, yes, but a place where they can ask the hard questions, the tough questions, where they can share their pains, where they can share their grievances and their frustrations, where they can really have opportunity to listen to the other and to learn from the other. And this kind of a place really hasn't been in existence until January of 2014, when the group first started meeting together. In the 7 years in which it has existed, has focused on trying to bring people together. That's sort of its first goal. And whether it be youth or women or children's summer camps, or young men and women who are about ready to go into the army, have opportunities to meet with young Palestinian men and women. It's been a place where these people who do not know each other have opportunity to meet the other, to truly listen to the other and learn from the other. And it has had just an amazing impact in bringing about reconciliation, bringing about some harmony between the two communities living there in the West Bank and in Judea and Samaria.
Before you even helped them, you were researching on all sides of the conflict and taking trips to learn as much as possible about every point of view. As a Christian pastor, what was motivating you?
That's a long story, but
Well,
if I
well, if we could briefly kind of not necessarily go into all the parts, because I'll probably be asking you some questions about that,
okay.
but really, literally, what motivated you?
In my own faith, I had been really wrestling with the teachings of Jesus, specifically those that are contained in the Sermon on the Mount, which can be found in the book of Matthew, chapters 5-7. And in that book, Jesus talks about how blessed are the peacemakers, for they should be called the children of God. Jesus talks about loving one's enemies and praying for those who persecute you, and doing good to those who hate you, and blessing those who curse you, and so forth. And I began sort of a quest to understand, what does it mean to truly love those who are different than I am, so I was looking for opportunities to build relationships with those who are different than I am, and that led me to actively pursue relationships with Muslims and Jews who live in my own community here in the Reston Herndon area of Virginia. It was that really led me into this whole area of peacemaking and reconciliation. I won't explain the whole story about how I ended up in Israel-Palestine. Maybe we'll get to that later.
Mm.
But while I was there on my first trip there, with an interfaith clergy group from my local area here,
Mhm.
One of the things I noticed was the great separation of the two people groups, and that as people are sort of want to do, as we're motivated to do when we feel threatened, when we feel that our security uh, is threatened, we tend to try to separate from those that we feel that are a threat to us. You see that in Israel-Palestine with the creation of the separation barrier, with all the many checkpoints, with even the withdrawal of the Israeli from the Israeli settlements in the Gaza Strip. The society in Israel-Palestine has been designed to keep the Palestinian people separated from Israelis by and large. But what I began to notice over time is that the greater the separation between the two peoples was resulting in greater violence, not less violence. That separation was leading to greater conflict. It wasn't reducing conflict between the two people groups. And it kind of goes back to those initial things I was saying, that separation of peoples very often leads to the mistrust and the misunderstanding and the suspicion and stereotypes and so forth, which then leads to fear and ultimately violence. And that's what sort of motivated me in large part to try to get involved on the ground in Israel-Palestine.
When you were on the trip with this interfaith group, you began noticing as you spent time with the other clergy that it was broadening your perspective, even of God, and then today you believe strongly in the benefits of interactions for all groups with the other, whether religiously, racially, nationally, demographically, and economically. Can you speak about that?
Yes, I'd be happy to. I feel that the the more we're able to connect with those who are different than we are, our perspectives, our understandings become much, much broader. Certainly, as I've spent more and more time with people of other faith traditions, my understanding of God, my encounters with God, they've expanded significantly. God has become much bigger to me. When we only spend time with those who are just like we are, we tend to get a very insular view of the world. We understand our perspective and our perspective alone. We understand, as Rav Hanan was saying in the video, we sort of understand our truth and our truth alone. However, when we start to meet others, we start to understand their worldviews, their faith, their understandings, are become to realize that truth is much bigger than maybe the truth that we're clinging to and holding on to. And you begin to have just a much greater and broader understanding and perspective of the world. And it also begins to build up within you a capacity to not just to be able to tolerate the other. You really build up a greater and greater capacity to love the other and admire the other in their differences. You less and less feel this need to have to try to make people like yourself, that you can truly enjoy and esteem what makes them different from you and unique with you. And ultimately, that's where you find what I would call true community and true harmony. It's not when you've all become uniform. It's when you come to a place where you can sort of include other people's understandings and truths with yours, and it gives you a much greater perspective on life, on God. I mean, you name it. And so I think it's an extremely healthy thing to be spending a great deal of time with those who are different than you are. Spend a great deal of time with, certainly those who believe differently and understand God differently than you do. Uh, and it begins to build the bridges that are so desperately needed in our world.
Today, I really have to chuckle to myself because so many peacemakers that I meet um, have gone through a personal transformation to get to this point. And I always, in your personal story, I marvel, you used to describe yourself as in your younger days, as a conservative Republican war-fighting hawk. And in fact, it's what you did for a job. And yet today, you come from such a different perspective. Can you just touch on that? Because I think transformation is so difficult. But I think it's important for people to see that people do change, and sometimes it's an extreme change.
Yes, you're right when when you use those sort of adjectives to describe me.
Oh, you
So
actually, these were how you
my
describe
words,
yourself.
my
I wouldn't
words.
put those
Yeah.
words in my
So
mouth.
yeah, I was a hawk would be is a correct term. Certainly when compared with the word dove. I worked for a full decade in our nation's defense and intelligence community, trying to understand the future warfare environment and how the United States could prepare for that environment, understand our future adversaries, not for reconciling with them, but for defeating them. But in defeating them, destroying our enemies, so to speak. And so, in many ways, I was sort of a war planner. Um, it was in trying to follow Jesus, and as I learned more and more about his teachings, it really called into question my identity and who sort of I had been up until that time. I had trouble looking at those verses again in the Sermon on the Mount about being a peacemaker and loving my enemies. Uh, it is very difficult to sort of justify my worldviews and my positions on things when I was staring at those verses. And so I did undergo a transformation that took quite some time, where uh, I've really laid down, sort of turned my back on my war planning, hawkish past, and have really embraced the role of becoming a peacemaker, a reconciler, one who's looking to build bridges between not only myself and those who are different than I am, but encourage others who are divided, who are separated from each other, to find ways to bring them together. It was not an easy transformation. I felt at times that I was being broken almost, and in some ways I felt like I was almost violating my own personhood as I was trying to turn away from the things that I had so strongly believed previously. But at the same time, I felt that it was a process that I had to go through. And I'm looking back on it now, I'm very thankful that I did go through it, but there were times certainly in the midst of it where I wanted out. Life started to become difficult, not easier.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. Um, or perhaps I've gone through my own transformation, so maybe a little bit of that I can. um, uh, so in 2011, you're on this great trip with uh, other clergy, and during breaks, you are on your own, wandering around different areas. And I wanted to show um, this first slide where in your wanderings, you end up at this yeshiva.
Yes.
And can you describe kind of in your naivety wandering into this yeshiva and what happened?
Yeah, during that interfaith clergy trip back in 2011, I'd really, I felt while I was there, I wasn't just being called to deepen my relationships with my fellow clergy men and women who I was with, that I was feeling more and more called to play some kind of role on the ground. And as you said, during our free time on one day, instead of going to the shuk, the marketplace, and looking for gifts and things like that, I just felt led to find a cab driver who was willing to just bring me to places, at least in and around Jerusalem, that could teach me about the conflict. And so he drove me into Silwan, which biblically we know of as Siloam, but in Silwan is a place where it's kind of on the front lines between Israelis and Palestinians in East Jerusalem. And it was my first experience of rock throwing and the tear gas and the rubber bullets and so forth, and just kind of helped me to see, like, oh wow, this is real. I then asked if I could visit a settlement and see what a settlement was like, and he drove me to Neve Yaakov, sort of in the northern parts of East Jerusalem. And while we were there, he drove up. We stopped at there was a Beit Midrash there, and I wandered in, and all of these young men were busily debating their questions of the day and digging into the Hebrew scriptures, and they became kind of fascinated about, like, what is this American doing, sort of just wandering off the street into their school. But they welcomed me. They came over, and we began to have a great conversation about the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I began to just ask them some questions about what does it mean, what is their understanding of what does it mean that the people of Israel be a light to the nation, so light for the Gentiles, and talk to them about, how does that play out in relationship with the Palestinians. And we had a great discourse. And that's sort of, at that point, I felt even more called to get involved on the ground in Israel-Palestine. I just sensed that God was with me, that this was something that he wanted me to be involved in. And I just felt it was confirmed through the interaction with those young students, and just seeing how receptive they were of me and kind of my questions, and just with how that interaction went.
And then you've made, I believe, 12 trips since, but in 2012, the following year, you attended Christ at the Checkpoints, where Palestinian evangelical Christians, who are a small percentage of Palestinians, the far majority being Muslim, present a very pro-Palestinian point of view. How would you describe the conference? And you'll get to, I'm sure, part of your story where you ended up at the protest, and I'll show that slide in a minute.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. 2012, I attended the Christ at the Checkpoint conference in Bethlehem. I enjoyed the conference immensely because it really gave me opportunity to learn. I was able to visit a lot of different sites and locations that I hadn't had opportunity to visit earlier. Met a great number of people in which I could, we didn't just listen to speakers at the conference, but just built up relationships with those in the crowd. You're correct. It is a sort of a one-sided view. It's a Palestinian view, and from a Palestinian Christian perspective of the conflict. And as Hanan was saying, what I was getting was the truth, but I was hearing one piece of the truth as I was hearing that perspective. You can't help but be caught up in and even swayed by those opinions. And as people, are wont to do when they get involved in something new, and you're hearing one perspective or another. I swung sort of like a pendulum, swung very strongly, for that, certainly during that conference, into a very, into a pro-Palestinian viewpoint. as kind of hearing all their perspectives, yet I'd only had a very limited presentation of Israeli perspectives. So later in that 10, 12-day period while I was there was an opportunity to go to a weekly demonstration that took place in the village of Al-Masra, which is south of Bethlehem. And in that demonstration, I marched with those who were a part of the demonstration. And really amazingly, our group was able to walk all the way up, or we were able to go up to a point in which there was a line of Israeli soldiers. I should say that the demonstrations were to protest the building of the separation barrier in that region, as well as the expansion of some of the local settlements in that area, Efrat being one of them. And as we walked up, I felt at any moment this could get sort of out of hand. You have this line of Israeli soldiers, you have all these demonstrators coming towards them. And it was really amazing that we were able to come right up to them. And I began about a 45-minute conversation with the Israeli soldiers who were standing there. And this was an important part of my story, because it was at this time, as I started hearing some of the Israeli perspectives and hear from young men and women who were, in uniform, who were serving their country, as I was hearing new perspectives, I began to recognize that I only had part of the truth at that point in time. And I began to hearing more of the story. And I started realizing that so often when people approach this conflict, and really many conflicts, we so often feel like we need to take a side. And certainly when it comes to Israel and Palestine, the world as they get involved in this conflict, will usually line up on one side or the other, either the pro-Israeli side or the pro-Palestinian side. We just lend our voices, screaming and shouting at the other side, and how our side is right and the other side is wrong, or our side is legitimate, the other side is illegitimate, that our side is a true nation, the other side isn't a nation, that our side's a real people group, the other side isn't a people group, that our side belongs in the Middle East, the other side doesn't, and it just deepens the divide. The chasm only gets deeper when we lend our voices to one side or the other. And it was really at that moment during that march, I sensed that I was being called to something different. And that was to stand in the divide. I realized that there was a lack of people who would stand in the divide, not take a side, and look for opportunities to bring people together from one side with the other. And that really began to change things. And I should mention, during that trip, I had the opportunity to meet someone who you've interviewed, I know, Myron Joshua.
Oh, yeah.
On that trip, I met Myron, and it started just a deep, deep friendship between Myron and me. And kind of from that point forward, I began to plan all of my visits with Myron to find ways to bring Palestinians and Israelis together in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria.
So now we're going to get more to the root side of the story. Mm-hmm. And one of the people whose remains, even though unfortunately he's passed away, extremely influential in the area, really to both Israelis and Palestinians, was Rabbi Frohman. And let me show you his picture. There he is with a big smile. And Rabbi Frohman really had some unusual ways of looking at both sides. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about his teachings and what you thought about them, because some people might have thought he was naive, some people might have thought he was deluded, but he actually felt that the settlements could be what he called fingers of peace, reaching out into the Palestinian communities to live together. And can you talk a bit about his philosophies?
Sure, I'd be happy to. For those who may not know, Rabbi Menachm Frohman is the head rabbi, the leader of the Israeli settlement of Tekoa in the West Bank. And he's a fascinating man. He's was part of the Gush Emunim, the sort of the leadership group of the settlement community in the building and the spread of the settlements in the West Bank. He also had a large group of followers, disciples. The Hebrew word that I've come to learn is Talmudim. And interestingly, in his Talmudim, they were predominantly Jewish, but he also had some Palestinians as his followers. He had a very unique, a very new, a very fresh way of understanding the world in which he lived. And that he saw that the settlements in and of themselves were not a hindrance to peace, but instead, with the settlements being built up in and around or near the, I should say, around and near the Palestinian cities and villages of the West Bank, would give opportunities for the people groups to connect and to build relationships with each other. And that's why, as you mentioned, they were referred to as the fingers of peace. Important to Rabbi Frohman was the Jewish teaching of loving your neighbor. And he said, who are my neighbors? And the Palestinians are my neighbors. And so he actively, proactively, intentionally would work to build relationships with his Palestinian neighbors. And that extended even as far as reaching out to and building a relationship with the leader of Hamas, Sheikh Yassin. Wasn't to just build up a friendship or a relationship in that way. It was really to press Sheikh Yassin to change his ways, to try to see, to look at the Israelis in a different way. That it wasn't reconciliation for reconciliation's sake, but it was reconciliation in order to build a path which would lead to peace between the two peoples. Certainly, Menachem Frohman received a lot of criticism from Israelis for taking such a step and meeting with and building relationship with Sheikh Yassin, but that didn't deter him. It didn't slow him down. He really believed in what he was doing, and in many ways, he was a maverick in that regard. He passed away in 2013. I was able to visit his home the night before he passed away. It was a very powerful evening. I'll always remember that evening. And just in experiencing the great love that his followers had for him, and being able to be a part of that congregation that was there that day was very powerful for me. But it helped me to see that in his legacy would be all of these followers who would try to continue on in his footsteps. My understanding of a rabbi-disciple relationship is that disciples were learning to not just, they weren't there just to learn what their rabbi knew, but could really be that rabbi when the rabbi could no longer be with them any longer. And so many of these young men and women have sort of moved out and followed in his footsteps. And many of them have become part of this, the Roots organization. I know I'm jumping ahead a bit, but you can just see the impact that Rabbi Frohman's had on so many people. Just a man beloved by many.
Yeah. And here you were, you're in all these trips, you'd stay in Jewish settlements or Palestinian homes and villages weeks at a time, and you would live with the people and follow their customs and learn their cultures. And was there anything that surprised you that you learned?
I'm going to take just a quick step back because I forgot to say, Rabbi Frohman in many ways then became sort of an inspiration for me as I was doing what I was doing. And so, just sort of understanding his heart and trying to imitate that and have that same kind of heart helped me in many ways on my own process of transformation that we were talking about earlier, and coming to a place of really trying to deepen relationships by building that respect and admiration for all others. And which leads me to then your question. I then, between in the years, especially the year 2013, I spent a great deal of time trying to meet as many Israelis and Palestinians who live in the West Bank and build relationships with them. And I realized that in order to best do that I needed to try to live as they live when I was with them. And so when I lived in the Jewish settlements, I did my best to live as an Orthodox Jew. And when I lived in the Palestinians villages, I tried to live according to the customs of the Palestinian peoples as best as I could. And really in that process of trying to identify with them and in the deepest ways possible, it really helped me just to build a love for both peoples, which is essential when you then start trying to move out and to be that bridge upon which you can bring peoples together. If you haven't built relationships of trust with peoples on both sides, it's extremely difficult to be a bridge builder. They need to know that you love them and that you care for them and that you are going to speak on their behalf rightly and fairly, and that you have their best interests at heart when bringing them together with those from the other side. They need to trust you. They need to be able to trust you. Because remember, as we were talking earlier, they have to overcome their own fears and suspicions and so forth in crossing that divide and meeting with the other. And then the person who's standing sort of as that reconciler, as the bridge builder, you have to play a role that is seen, that is trusted by those on each side. And that only comes over time and by, building real and true relationships of trust with people. And yeah, that took a lot of time. But which was cool is in spending all that time with them, it helped me to identify who are those who really have that heart and that desire to step across the divide and meet with the other.
You figuratively helped give birth to the incredible organization that is Roots. And I had to laugh because along the way, I've learned that the day celebrated as Roots' birthday is actually synchronistically also my birthday, although not in 2014. However, 2014 is also so very special to me because that's when we took our infamous trip to Israel. So I'm wondering, John, Roots does so much. Is there anything that comes to mind that are some things that you're really proud of that Roots has accomplished?
A bunch of things, sort of a stream of consciousness. The first is that those who are the leaders in the organization on each side have stayed the course. They've pressed through a great deal of criticism from their own communities, even threats from their own communities, and have really determined that this is worth their life work and energy. And so I'm just amazed by the leaders and how they continue on despite the many challenges that they face. Some of the things that really stand out for me, I love the fact that Roots hosts the different mechina, the pre-army schools where I guess it's the year right before the Israeli young men and women will join the army, that Roots hosts them. And they get to come and they get to meet with Palestinians and hear the Palestinian perspectives as they share their lives and their challenges and how they view the soldiers. And what an amazing way to help to start maybe removing some of the fears, or at least giving more understanding to these young Israelis before they have to man a post or a checkpoint in the West Bank. Just those efforts alone, I am sure, have reduced tension, have reduced violence, just in helping Israelis to really, connect with and humanize those who they're working with every day, at these difficult security posts in the West Bank. I'm also amazed by how the Roots organization comes and stands with the victims of violence whenever it takes place, and whether the victims are Israeli or Palestinian, that they will very quickly come and with their condolences to those who are the victims, let them know that this is that they don't stand for this. This is not what they're about. They're able to bring a great deal of comfort to those who are hurting, and those who have lost loved ones, and they also do a lot of things behind the scenes of bringing leaders of the communities together during times of crisis in order to diffuse things, to kind of bring down the heat, the tensions that might exist in the communities when some act or another occurs. These are some of the things that are really important to me, because these are active efforts to reduce violence, lower tensions, and so forth. Another thing that leaps to mind is I love the interfaith groups that they have, where faith leaders come together and they teach and they learn about each other's faith traditions. Again, just building up that mutual admiration and respect for the other, the things that are so necessary to build true community and true harmony between peoples. No matter what the political solutions might be down the road, the two people groups need to live together in harmony and community. And it's these types of efforts now which are going to be so essential in keeping peace and creating what I would call a true shalom in a future order, whatever that looks like. And so they're doing a lot of that hard work now. It's so difficult to measure your success when there's still no political solution, and things are still, violence still erupts here and there. So it's difficult to measure the success, but knowing that person by person, heart by heart, lives are being transformed in just how they view the other and know the other and understand the other. And so these are just some of the things that Roots is doing that I'm so proud of, and that I get so excited about.
One of the things that you provided me with were a number of photos that I've heard these stories through the years, but it was Okay, part two that brought tears to my eyes, to actually, beyond the story, see pictures from these times. But in 2013 was the first time you tried to facilitate bringing Israeli settlers and Palestinians together. Can you talk about your meeting at the Everest restaurant in Beit Jala and what impact it had on you?
Yeah, I believe the first meeting that I ever was able to facilitate, yeah, it did take place in Beit Jala, between Meyer Joshua and Elias Cohen and a Palestinian gentleman who I'm very good friends with, and brought them together. And for me, it just helped me to see what was possible, that bringing peoples together who had never met before, that this was possible, and that there were ways to do it. Just oftentimes there was a need for someone to kind of stand in the middle and to do it. And so I always look back on that one meeting as being, the episode that launched all the many, many, many other meetings that have taken place since then.
Yeah, I'll bring up, let's see, the first meeting at the Abu Awad property. And this is right here is Ali Abu Awad, who's very dear to me. And oh God, all these players. Anyway,
Yeah.
Shaul and
So yeah, it's Myron Joshua. Myron
Myron
Joshua
and
is on the left, and Shaul Yudin is in the middle. That's Elias Cohen.
Elias Cohen.
And then it's another
Yes.
Palestinian
Yeah.
friend of mine who's been very active in reconciliation circles, and then Ali. So this was in January of 2014, and it was actually the first day that I met Ali. I had heard about Ali meeting with some of the settlement leaders in the West Bank, and that encouraged me to reach out to him, to connect with him, and asked him if I could bring some of my Israeli friends along with me when I went to meet with him. And he said, yes, certainly. So we met on it at his property, located not far from the Gush Etzion Junction, and we just had an amazing meeting. And the previous year, Shaul had been working with another man, Menachm, and a Palestinian named Ziad Sabatin to start what they called Heaven's Field, and it would be a sort of an agricultural kind of cooperative field where Palestinians and Israelis could come together and meet and to work the field. It was going to be in the beautiful valley next to the Palestinian village of Husan, not too far from Beitar Elit, and we just couldn't get it off the ground. And so Shaul began to share his ideas with Ali, and Ali offered the property there that we were sitting on that day as a place that could be used for reconciliation efforts. And over the next several weeks, so we began to plan that out. That next set of photos, one evening there at the property, we worked together. In the center photo, or in the right photo on the right-hand side is actually Khalid Abu Awad, Ali's brother, and Khalid, who's now the Palestinian head of Roots. We had different planning meetings throughout the next several weeks, and we planned a large family gathering, which then took place January 29th. And it was at that meeting that Rabbi Schlesinger, who you can see there around the table, that was the day in which he met Palestinians for the first time, in which he alluded to in his video that you played at the beginning of this talk. And it was that day that, in a way, Roots was formed. It wasn't called Roots at that time. This was just the first step of people coming together. And as far as I know, it was one of the largest, if not the largest, gatherings of Palestinians and Israelis together in one place. And it was right there near the Gush
There you
Etzion
are.
Circle. Yes. And this was, you say that several times tears come to your eyes. Well, I shed a lot of tears that day, that evening, as I was just thinking about all that had taken place on that day. And what I didn't know on that day was how far things would go. And now 7 years later, with the Roots organization, and how that entire property has been developed with meeting rooms and kitchens and places where people can eat together and meet, fellowship, build their relationships. Yeah, so these are kind of some of the earliest photos of that group together. There's
Great
Ali,
picture of Ali and Myron
and that's Ziad Sabatine, and then
Sabatine.
Shaul from behind.
And folks over here. Yeah, these
Peter,
these pictures, they get to me every time. It's so cool after all these years, and all the things that have gone on, and all the just the great impact that they've had to see the beginnings. And I know that COVID kind of caused them problems, but now they've started back up again, so that's fantastic.
Yes. Yeah, COVID, as you know, worldwide caused things to slow down or shut down, but Roots has survived that, and the programs have started up again, full swing there at the property. Fundraising efforts have continued to support all those efforts, and so yeah, things are definitely looking really good for Roots right now.
One of the things that I always found really fascinating was that through the years, one of the more dangerous aspects of your work was in some of your meetings when you met with extremists from both sides. Yet something that you learned that surprised you was that there are many points of similarity between them. You said much more so than the extremists, than when they meet with perhaps other left side peace organizations from the international community or from Tel Aviv. Can you talk about that? What are the similarities?
Yeah, I think it's essential that those who are viewed as being the extremists on each side, that they're not ignored or avoided. Conversely, I think they need to be engaged fully. If they're not included in these talks of reconciliation and so forth, they'll do everything they can to undermine. And so, in more, in later years, 2015, 16, 17 timeframes, I started really trying to get to know those who would be considered to be more out there on the extremes. And when you meet them and you hear their hearts as you get to know them better, and then even find ways to bring them together, certain things kind of bubble up to the surface, which are very, very interesting. They might be the extremes, and they might be almost like sworn enemies to each other. But on each side, those who are viewed as extremes are some of those who are the most religious, who faith and love for God are extremely important, and love for family. These types of things they have in common, and are able to connect on, and almost like agree on. That to me is fascinating. That if you can get these folks into the same room, just like any other human being, those walls of fear and hatred and mistrust and so forth start crumbling as they begin to build some kind of human relationship with each other. And so, if those who are most, let's say, driven by their faith and their worldviews and their outlooks on life and their understandings of their belonging to the land and so forth. If they are included in this process, I think, in which they have to be, and their desires and their needs are taken into account, I think it can go a long way, I believe, towards diffusing violence in the process. Again, anything that can reduce the separation of the peoples, that can bridge the divides between peoples and bring them together, it will have a positive outcome or a positive influence on this process going forward. That's hard. It's not easy to bring these folks together. You need to actively go out and build relationships of trust with those on each side, and then look for those creative opportunities and ways to bring them together in places that they feel are safe, where they know they're going to have an opportunity to share their hearts with the others. They have a chance to be heard. But then, once, like most anyone, once they've had a chance to be heard, they're willing to hear themselves. And so, my hope is that going forward, that more and more of those who are considered to be out there on the extremes are included more and more in these types of efforts and these processes.
Well, we just have a little bit of time, but I wanted to squeeze in two more questions. One is, what impact do you think Roots has had over the years?
I think it's really difficult to measure, because as long as there's no political solution, as long as there is, continued conflict and there's continued violence, it's hard to see the impact that Roots is having. But where Roots can be, where it's really having an effect, is in the lives of the people on the ground. That people who get involved in the sort of the Roots process, if you will, they get engaged in its programs, their hearts are being changed. They're beginning to view the other differently. You now see, more efforts to try to uh, encourage, the building rights being given to Palestinians in say in the Area C, in the West Bank. You see more Israelis getting behind that. There's kind of again, it's hard to measure. It can only really be measured in the individual's heart, but these are the people who in the long run will need to live together in community, in harmony, to allow any political solution to work. Neither people group is going anywhere. And so they're together for the long haul. And so, Roots is trying to do that hard work on the ground to build community. And that is, I think, essential to no matter what, happens in going forward.
So for my final question to you is, if you were speaking to the people of the world, what would the message be that you'd want them to know about the importance of your type of bridge building peace work and how they could help?
I think in a lot of ways, I think what I've learned in Israel-Palestine can be transferred to any area of conflict in the world. The need for peoples who are different, who believe differently, who see things differently, the need for them to be able to connect and to build relationships with each other, to start dealing with the fear and the mistrust and the misunderstanding and the need to break down the stereotypes which exist between the sides. That is needed in almost every area of conflict in the world. The key is that people need to be open to meeting with, connecting with, and hearing the stories of the other. And Rav Hanan's understanding that, and he's used the expression, which he didn't use in that video, the hubris of exclusivity. The hubris of exclusivity that people have, that they see, they have the monopoly on truth, that the way they see the situation, that's the only way to see it, and that's truth. That hubris needs to be broken down. And that people build up a capacity to be able to hold their own truth, but also then make space for the truth of the other. And so that these different narratives, ways of viewing the conflict, they make space for each other, and then really, like, for lack of a better expression, a meta narrative is created, one that can contain the truths of both peoples. If that can be applied in different conflicts around the world, you've gone a long way to moving the discussion forward, to creating a reality in which the needs and the desires of all the people involved are met. That word shalom, and Rav Hanan mentioned it again in that video. He said that the word whole and the word shalom are together, that wholeness needs to be achieved, that all people need to have their needs met, their desires met, in order for true peace to be created, not just part. True shalom can never be created at the expense of another. And so if we can find ways to bring peoples together with their truths and create a bigger truth that encompasses the truths of all, I just think it has the capacity, the potential to bring down the levels of tension to a place where a new way forward can be forged. That's, I think, for me, one of the greatest takeaways of this entire thing. It's one of the lessons learned that's essential for the different areas of conflict in the world today.
Well, thanks, John, for sharing with us your unique and interesting experiences and for all the work you've done to make this world a better place. Next week, we'll be speaking with another incredible peace activist, Bishop Emeritus Dr. Menachm A. Yunan of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Jordan and the Holy Land. He is not only the first Palestinian to hold this high position, but he is also the first Palestinian Lutheran to serve as president of the World Lutheran Federation. He's received so many awards for peace from all over the world and other distinctions that it'd be impossible to name them all, but to name just a few, he was awarded the Human Rights Award from the United Nations Association, the Bethlehem Star Award from Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, the Holy Land Christian Ecumenical Foundation Prize, the Building Bridges of Understanding Award from Georgetown University. He received the Menachm Agricola Medallion from Finland and the Templar Peace Prize. To put it succinctly, he is a world leader for reconciliation in the Holy Land, interfaith dialogue, accepting the other's right to express their opinions without necessarily agreeing, and taking nonviolent action when needed. We hope you'll join us, and for now, may you live in peace, shalom, and salam.